The following program is brought to you by TZ Productions, offering 40 years of media experience.
The Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek Trust, supporting arts, history, science, and this program on KPTS.
This is where the power players and personalities of Kansas come to share their stories. This week, we go one-on-one with Kansas' newest member of Congress. Ron Estes is a fifth-generation Kansan. He was born in Topeka, but has lived most of his life in the Wichita area. A trained civil engineer with a master's in business administration, Estes has worked as a manager and consultant for major corporations such as Koch Industries and Bombardier Learjet. In 2004, Estes ventured into politics, being elected Sedgwick County Treasurer and then re-elected 4 years later. In 2010, Estes ousted the incumbent to become Kansas State Treasurer. Then in 2017, he won a special election to become 4th District Congressman, replacing now CIA Director Mike Pompeo. That's the resume. But what about the man? Who is Ron Estes, and what's his plan for representing South Central Kansas in Washington? Sit back and find out. We go one-on-one with Ron Estes right now. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's edition of One-on-One. I'm Victor Hogstrom. It's a pleasure to have the Honorable Ron Estes join us for the next half hour. Honorable Estes, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Victor.
Now, you were born in Topeka,
Right.
Kansas, but lived most of your life in Wichita. How did that happen?
Well, actually, my father worked for Goodyear. I was born in Topeka and lived in Topeka and just south of there on a family farm. And then when I was 12, he ended up going to Tennessee to help start up a Goodyear plant there. So I actually went to high school and college in Tennessee, and they retired and moved back to Kansas, live on the farm. And when our first child was born, our son was born, my wife and I decided we wanted to move back, be closer to family. So we moved back to Wichita and actually went to work with Koch Industries, and the rest is history, I guess.
Tell us about how did you, a civil engineer, trained, educated civil engineer, become a politician?
I have a civil engineering undergraduate degree and a master's in business administration, and most of my career was in the private sector doing consulting work or operations management, mostly with manufacturing and distribution companies, but looking for ways to how do we make the business more efficient, how do we save money, make cost cutting, improve customer service, and make things more efficient. And that tend to think of, okay, now how can I translate that into public sector and public service and help make some of the things that our governments do more efficient and effective.
So what about the position of treasurer that interested you the most?
Well, when I first ran for Sedgwick County Treasurer in 2004, it seemed to be a great fit with my private career from the standpoint of, the county treasurer's office deals with some of the things, collecting taxes and getting motor vehicle tags out. And, there's lots of room there to help improve customer service and make sure that we're doing those processes as efficiently and as effectively as we need to be.
So with all of those experiences, who is Ron Estes?
Well, I think when I look at, particularly from a public sector standpoint, there's a role for our government, but it should be limited. We should make sure that we have the services that provide a good safety net, provide defense for our country, and make sure that that works well. But as we do that, we need to make sure we're efficient and effective in that process and make sure that works. We have, my wife Susan and I have 3 kids. Our son Brent's going to Kansas State, and we have 2 daughters that are going to Andover High starting in this fall. And when I look at things that are going on in the country, I want to make sure that I help leave the state and the country better off for them in their adulthood as it was for me.
Did you always have a dream of a life in politics?
Well, that's kind of interesting. I helped a lot of people run for office over the years. In fact, Susan and I met at a Young Republican National Convention, and that's where we met each other. And so we got involved a lot in helping people get elected, knew that was something that was important for us. I don't know that I necessarily had a vision that I wanted to run for office myself or what particular office. I certainly didn't plan, a year and a half ago that I'd be in Congress right now. I just didn't have a design or a career path identified that's what I was going to do.
So what is Ron Estes' philosophy? First, political philosophy, and then personal philosophy.
Well, I think I'm a conservative person, and I think that's part of what South Central Kansas is, and so I want to make sure I represent the voters in South Central Kansas and make sure that we have an efficient and effective government that works for us, make sure that things run well, that we use the taxpayer dollars wisely for the things that we legitimately need to spend them for. From a personal standpoint, I like to be, a good husband and father, and making sure that, I help my kids go through their lives, get them set up and stable and ready to move forward with things that they want to do as adults.
When did you first recognize, one, your political philosophy and your personal philosophy?
I think it was way back young when I was, from a political standpoint, just looking at the different political campaigns and looking at, what seemed to make sense in terms of looking at what processes worked, who said what during a campaign, and then how did they act once they got in office. And I think it's very important that us as elected officials, that if we say something we're going to do on a campaign, then we actually then go and do that, because that's part of the public trust. Same thing from a personal philosophy. I think growing up, I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different opportunities, on the family farm with family members, opportunity to work in a variety of different industries throughout my career. And it's really helped me become a more rounded person, I believe.
So are you an unwavering ideologue?
Well, there's a few people in politics now that kind of get that way, and that's not me at all. What I think is really important is that we have relationships with individuals, whether they're in the same party, whether they're in the other party, whether it's somebody that you agree with on all the issues or not. But at the end of the day, we've got to figure out ways to work together to help make the country better, and at the end of the day, helping make things more efficient for everybody in South Central Kansas.
So what helped you decide to run for Congress?
Well, I first looked at this a year ago when Mike Pompeo was looking at running for the Senate. And one of the things that I had been starting to get more frustrated with as state treasurer kind of goes back to the first couple of years I was state treasurer. We spent a lot of time with our national association looking at ways that we could help each other. How can we, take some good ideas, some best practices that maybe happened in another state and bring them to Kansas and help make Kansas State Treasurer's office more efficient. But the last 3 or 4 years that I was state treasurer, I saw that we actually ended up becoming more of a lobbying group. We ended up having to deal a lot more with the Washington infrastructure because there were new regulations coming out or new laws that were being talked about being implemented. And we could see the impact not just on our state treasurer's office, but on some of the financial services firms that we ran into and dealt with on a daily basis. And so what really was the driving force was that, if you really want to make a problem go away, you need to work on it at the source. And so I got to the point of, if I run for office, then I can help shape those laws, help make them efficient when we implement them, and make sure that the regulations are good when they are implemented and applied to people.
So which laws are you most interested in reshaping?
I think there's several things that we need to do. One deals with the federal budget. I mean, we can't continue to spend more money than we bring in. That's one of the things that, over the last several years, we've increased the national debt. It's up to roughly $20 trillion now, which is, $60,000 per person as far as debt. And that's not something that I want to put on my children, that they have to pay that debt back just for the things that we want to spend this year. So we really got to focus on that from an operations standpoint in terms of making sure that we don't spend more than what we bring in. The other thing, I think there's a lot of regulatory issues that have just slowed our economy down. The last 8 to 10 years, our economy's kind of grown at a roughly 2 to 2.25%, which is low by historical standards. And if we can just get that up to 3 to 3.5%, the economic growth out of that will be tremendous in terms of having more jobs, more opportunity for individuals, more money in our pocket, make it easier for parents to help get their kids a college education and start their own careers and their own adulthood. And so there's a lot of things ranging from some of the EPA regulations, ranging from, I know I personally saw from the state treasurer's role that a lot of things dealing with the Dodd-Frank law that went in place that actually put a lot of hindrances on banks and actually set them up so that they had to hire more compliance officers than they could hire lending officers. And so there's a lot of development that just hasn't happened because of some of those restrictions. So we need to fix some of those unintended consequences that came out of that.
So you now work with our new president, Trump. Do you agree with everything he does or says? What's your view?
I agree with a lot of things that he does and said. I mean, one of the things that's refreshing about the president is that, he campaigned and said he was going to do some things, and now that he's got in office, he's doing them. And so that's admirable for a politician. One of the things that I think that I wish he would talk more about is some of the so-called entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, just from a standpoint of that's consuming so much of our budget right now, or such a big percentage of the budget. And I think that's one of those things that we need to start looking on. How can we make some small adjustments now that over time will pay off? Because ultimately, all of those programs are slated to run out of money, particularly Social Security and Medicare, because they're set up as trust funds. And so if we don't do something to fix those, then we won't have money left in the trust fund, and people will have to end up getting less in benefits for those. So the quicker we can work to get those solved, I think that would be better for all of us.
What's your view on fake news?
Well, I think one of the great things about the internet is that we've got access to so much information. But one of the bad things about it is somebody can write something on the internet, a blogger or something, and it ends up not being based in fact. Right. Maybe it's an opinion that they had. Maybe it's something they heard somebody else say and thought was fact. So there really is a lot of that out there in the mainstream media and the internet right now. So I think we need to do a little bit more, making sure that we double check sources and making sure that there are some true facts around what's happening. Because what it's doing is it's tending to polarize our country. Right. Because as individuals, we tend to go to some favorite websites or some favorite news channels, and so if you're getting only one side of the story and part of that story is not true, then you end up having some misperceptions, and at the end of the day, that hurts our relationships with other individuals.
Do you tweet?
I do not tweet myself. You won't see me getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to send tweets out. We have some social media things that we do from the office and make sure that we get information out to provide information to individuals and about what's going on with the office. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting. We're at an interesting point in time in our life where some of the access to news and access to media is changing. A lot of people still read newspapers, but a lot don't. A lot of people see, public TV or commercial TV, but a lot of people are starting to look for other channels of information. A lot of people are going to social media, some with the standard Facebook and web pages, but some of the other media like tweeting and Instagram and other things. And so it's kind of interesting for me as a public official to figure out how do I work with all individuals and make sure that we get information out to them based on the avenues that they use for themselves to get their information.
Now, you've been in Washington only a few weeks. Are you enjoying it?
I really am. It's been a very exciting time. It's been a whirlwind, is kind of the way I described it. My chief of staff kind of coined the phrase that it's even worse than drinking from a fire hose. It's more like standing underneath a waterfall. You're kind of getting a lot of things. One of the things we had to do was set up our offices, both in Washington as well as in Wichita. And because there was such a long period of time from when Mike was first mentioned as CIA director, Mike Pompeo was first mentioned to be CIA director, and when our election occurred, that folks in the office had accepted other positions with other offices, whether the Trump administration or other offices. So we actually only had one person left in the Washington, D.C. office, and 2 people that stayed with us in the Wichita office. And so we had to do a lot of hiring to bring people on board from that standpoint. We also had, of course, had to get up to speed on all of the legislation that was going on and getting engaged in our committee structure in that organization. But so I kind of say it's been a very busy time, but it's been a good kind of busy in terms of getting things done.
Anything you dislike about being in Washington?
I think one of the things that really stood out in my mind when I was there, particularly the first couple of weeks, was there's really just not much interaction between the Republicans and the Democrats in the House. And, that we really don't talk together much. We sit on one side of the chamber, they sit on the other. And one of my committees.
Do you eat together?
Not really, because we tend to, we don't have there are cafeterias in the buildings, but people are on their own schedule. And so you can if you want to, but it tends to be that the only time you really interact would be on committees. And I'm fortunate, one of the committees I'm on is the Small Business Committee, and the chairman and the ranking member talk a lot about, we're a bipartisan committee and we work together. So I'm looking forward to that aspect.
All right. Tell us about your thinking process. Do you think you've worked with numbers all of your career, or most of it, with a civil engineering background, more numbers? Mm-hmm. So do you think with numbers, or you think philosophically?
Well, the way I think, probably a two-part answer to that. One is I do think a lot with numbers. I want to make sure that we have the facts, that we have the right data. A lot of times the things that we think are important because they impact us a lot or cause maybe a burden for us are such rare occasions that you don't really have as much of a true impact on cost or impact on the issues that you have to address. So I like knowing the data, I like knowing the facts around that. At the same time, I also like to interact with people and to deal with the issues and get an understanding of what's important to them, where are they coming from, because when somebody says something, there's obviously a basis on why they're saying that, and you want to make sure you understand where what the issue is that they're trying to solve and how they work through that. So it's kind of two different slants on solving that problem. Both from a numerical standpoint and a data-driven standpoint, but also engagement with individuals and their issues.
All right. So let's come to one of my favorite parts of the program, where we play a little word game. But this one is a little different, so I will start a sentence and you finish it. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, the first one. One thing I would like to do but never have is...
Wow. Ride in a submarine.
Oh. If I could be a fly on the wall somewhere, it would be?
It probably would be in the Oval Office in the White House to try to understand more about some of the policy directions and where we're going with the country.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
The next one is, I am most offended by?
But people who tell lies about what's going on, and that really impacts me from the standpoint of, as individuals, we do need to build a relationship with each other, and if somebody's out there telling something that's untrue, then obviously it sets a false situation to have a good relationship.
The last time I laughed really hard was?
earlier today, we were at the Riverfest breakfast, and they were going through all the introductions around all of the past Riverfest Admiral wind wagons, and so there were some jokes and tidbits on each of them as they went through that.
The last time I cried was?
Wow, that's a tough one. Probably watching some movie. I don't necessarily remember the name of the movies, but there's a few movies that have an impact on you as you think about the interrelationship with individuals.
The last time I was excited was?
It's been great being a member of Congress the last 5.5 weeks. When I talk about being busy, I really am enjoying it. I appreciate the opportunity that's been given me, and it's been really engaging and really given me an opportunity to get involved and to do more things than I would have imagined that I could.
The thing about life that upsets me the most is?
I think one of the things that we probably need to think about is how do we make sure we get all the things done that we want to do, that we value. And I think in too many cases, individuals either don't have the opportunity or don't take the time to do that.
The next one, if I inherited $100 million fortune, I would?
One of the things I would do with that is create a charitable foundation so that I'd have the opportunity to help others that were less fortunate. I probably also would spend some money on myself and my family too. But.
Good thing. Another one I have is, I believe that climate change is?
Well, one of the things about climate change that's really troubling is that a lot of the data has been either massaged, manipulated, or left out because it didn't fit the story that was needed to be talked about. So I think it's done an injustice to the individuals who are actually doing some of the research and promoting that, that an issue that they're trying to work. So I think we probably need to go back and let's clean up the research that's going on and make sure that we actually use good, valid data to talk about that.
My favorite media personality is?
You, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No. that's no. Well, thank you, but I'm not going to buy that. So.
That's a tough one. There's a lot of probably some of the writers in the newspapers that end up getting some of the facts out there that there's a lot of good writers. I don't know, Stephen Moore does a lot of things around financial and tax policy, and so I tend to be more of a reader, I guess, than a watcher of TV or listening to the radio.
What about the next one? My least favorite media personality is? Is it me again?
Oh, no, it's not you at all. Well, I think going back to what we talked about earlier, I don't know that I'd name names of individuals, but I think so many of the media outlets now are starting to, pitch their opinion as fact. And that's what it really bothers me about, how do we get facts and information out to individuals so that they can get the facts. So that's probably any media person who's out promoting their opinion as fact and slanting that in a way to misrepresent what's really the truth.
Well, that's not journalism. Right.
No, it's not journalism.
No.
I mean, from the standpoint of journalistic standards, going back years and years, it was making sure you had multiple sources and making sure that it was true and making sure that even if it wasn't good news, I mean, if it wasn't something that the subject of the story wanted to hear or wanted promoted about them, at least it was the truth. And as a public servant, we kind of have to expect that we need to be open and transparent, and that the things that we do are things that affect individuals, and we should expect some transparency about that, but we also should expect that it should be truthful.
So here's the last question or statement in this game. I wish public television would.
Oh, that's an interesting breakdown. There's a lot of things that are great about public TV, and we want to make sure that we get a broader sense of that out there. one of the things I think that's a risk at public TV and not necessarily here at KPTS, but some of the other stations, is that they as the news gets reported, sometimes it's one-sided as a part of that. So I want to make sure that look at both sides of the story and be reflective of that, as opposed to just one side that maybe hadn't been reported before, but making sure that both parts of the story are reported.
All right, so I have a few more questions. One of them is, have you ever had a one-on-one with President Trump?
Not a one-on-one per se, but after the health care vote, there was a press conference in the Rose Garden, and several of the members of the House went over to that.
You were in the group?
I was in the group, and after that press conference, he said, "Come on into the Oval Office." So we actually crowded around his desk. So I actually have stood in the Oval Office right behind the president at the desk, and so that was kind of interesting. So I have spoken to him a couple of times, but that's kind of the extent of his more public one than it is one-on-one. Yeah.
So what do you think makes a good president?
Well, I think it's a very tough job. I mean, when you think about the tremendous responsibility that the President of the United States has, not just for the country, but as a leader of the world, really. And so you've got to be able to analyze a lot of information, take in a lot of facts and a lot of opinions, and set a direction and be open and above board in communicating that direction, and then bring good people in around you to help execute that and make sure that it works.
What makes a good congressman?
I think one of the things about Congress is that we are the House of the people, and so we represent the individuals in our respective districts. And so, one, we need to make sure that we have a good connection with individuals in our district, so that we can represent them, bring our ideas to the table as well, and then take those ideas to Washington and work with representatives of people across the rest of the country, and work to come up with good policy that helps not just in our district but also across the country.
So what makes a good person in general, Congressman?
Well, I think as individuals, we need to have the ability to interact with other individuals, to have a good sense of humor, have a thoughtful demeanor that you can actually, analyze the information and make sure that it's sound and it makes sense, and that we can use that to make facts or to use those facts to make decisions on, and then actually to work with other people to get things accomplished.
Are you that person?
I think I am. I try to be that, both in my family life and as well as in my public service.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thank you.
Congressman Ron Estes, for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you.
I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching this edition of One-on-One. If you have questions or comments, please email them to oneonone@kpts.org. We may read your comments on the air on a future program. I'm Victor Hogstrom, and I'll see you next time.
The Alvin and Rosalie Sarah Check Trust, supporting arts, history, science, and this program on KPTS.
The preceding program was brought to you by TZ Productions, offering 40 years of media experience.